as a professional in this industry, you're always used to being able to kind of create a setting and control an environment, and we're also used to being really busy. But now that that's kind of been taken away, it's kind of like, how do you feel your day, and how do you feel useful in the day?
I'm Dani Valent, and this is Dirty Linen, the podcast that takes the issues the hospitality industry finds hard to air in public and shakes them all about. We're continuing Mental Health Fortnight on Dirty Linen by talking to one of my favourite hospitality operators, Nathan Toleman. I've been following Nathan's career for about 13 years when he and his wife Sarah first opened a cafe called Apt in Alphington, and there was something that felt so good about it, so Melbourne, but also, a little bit new. I don't think it was just the chocolate cheesecake brownie, which went viral before going viral was even a thing. And look where we are now with things going viral. But anyway, Nathan, I've loved the things that you've opened up over the years. Top Paddock, Higher Ground, and more recently, Hazel and Dessous in the city. Thank you so much for coming to have a chat to Dirty Linen.
No worries, Dani. How are you going?
Oh, I'm all right. It's such a loaded question at the moment, isn't it? It's like I feel like I'm...
Yeah, it's probably not.
I'm all right, everything considered. I mean, I made a really nice soup today. I went out this morning with my dog and put my hand on a big old gum tree for about 30 seconds, and that made me feel a bit grounded and good. But, yeah, everything's a bit of a strange, weird swirl at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, someone said to me the other day, what number are you, and she's like, depends when you ask me. I'm a number sort of 7 or 8 sometimes, and a number 3 or 4, 5 minutes later. I think that's the way it is at the moment, isn't it?
Is that like marking your mood out of 10 or whatever?
Yeah.
What do you reckon you are today?
Well, I've just had a good meeting for a few hours with some really inspiring people, so I'm back up to an 8. But, probably before that meeting I was about a 4 or 5. It's just crazy the way your moods can be so influenced at the moment.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of that, when I asked you to do this podcast over email a few days ago, first you just didn't answer me. And then when I prompted you, you gave me a very long no, because you just felt like, nah, you were feeling too swirly to chat about mental health. And then you messaged me back and said, actually, after all, you would. And I think you eventually came to the right answer, because I reckon if you're feeling like it's just too swirly and you can't talk about mental well-being because you're just feeling in the thick of it yourself, then that's probably exactly the right time to talk about it.
Yeah, that's right. I think I kind of felt like I didn't have a right to be talking about mental health because mine was such a mess at the moment. But then after listening to a few of your podcasts and just speaking to some friends, they were like, this is probably the time you should be talking the most about mental health and being open about it. So yeah, I came around and decided to talk to you.
Well, I appreciate it. You were one of the first people I thought of when I thought about talking about mental health and hospitality, and that's because you've been so proactive in your businesses about putting it front and centre of the way that you are as an employer, and making really fantastic activities open to your staff, like gardening and meditation. Can you talk a bit about all that stuff and what you've done as a business owner?
Yeah, look, I don't think it was necessarily a conscious decision that I'd made. Sort of, this is what it's important to me. But I think just from I'm married to a chef, and I've worked with so many great chefs over the years. I kind of always just feel like, as a chef or as a hospitality professional, you're constantly having to please others and always saying yes to everybody. And I think, you're constantly running on adrenaline. Busy restaurants don't have sort of breaks where you can kind of just, slow down for a minute. And then at the end of your shift, you're kind of, you have to sort of go home and somehow unwind and then go to bed. And a lot of the time, I sort of saw chefs and my fellow workers kind of going home really wide and having a few drinks, and I just kind of felt like it wasn't really healthy or sustainable. And I think just from the fortune of having a farm a few years ago, one of my chefs at the time, who was openly struggling with mental health, and at the time, people never really spoke about it. He said, look, I've suffered from anxiety and depression, and I said, do you want to come down to the farm and just do a bit of working on the farm with me, and he came down 1 day a week, and then it became 2 days a week, and we started to realise not only a change in him, but there was this kind of real positive energy around the produce that we were growing on the farm as well, and it just kind of all felt like, you know, the fact that the food that we eat, you know, is grown in the soil, and that sort of directly impacts our mental health and, you know, the way we feel, and then just being outside in nature with other people is a really great way to, you know, reduce stress and be more connected. And so we decided to sell the farm and then open up a more public farm where we could have it as a space where people felt, you know, they could come down, do a meditation, but openly talk about their mental health and then grow vegetables. And the more we kind of looked into it, we were kind of like, well, why is it that, you know, people talk about their physical health, they go to the gym, they floss their teeth for their dental health, but what are they doing for their mental health? And I think we kind of, you know, don't seem to acknowledge it, but everyone has mental health and everyone is affected by, you know, their environment. And just as I said, my mental health, when everything's going well, it's great, but when things start to, you know, not go so well around me or people in general, then mental health does start to suffer. So we just kind of wanted to make it something that people could talk about and, make it more of a public thing.
So that's common ground down past Geelong, right? So how does that integrate into your business?
Well, it's had to pivot a little bit, but initially it was set up as a farm that restaurants and cafes around Melbourne and Geelong can essentially treat as their own farm. So you pay to become a member. You come down to the farm 1 day a week. We work together as a group. We plant and we grow produce. We have lunch together, and then at the end of the day, you go back to your restaurant, and then every week all of the produce that gets grown gets divided up amongst the group and delivered to your restaurant. So, you know, I think there's been a real disconnect for a lot of chefs where they're not really necessarily connected to the food they're serving, and that was sort of what we were doing pre-COVID. And then once COVID came along, obviously all the restaurants and cafes closed down, so they no longer needed produce. So we've kind of pivoted a little bit. We're still focusing on regenerative agriculture and also mental health awareness, but we're also now involved in growing produce and providing meals for those most vulnerable in our community. So through Moving Feast, and also, which is a local social enterprise that's been set up. But also we've just reached out to some local community groups and organisations in the area to say, hey, we've got this produce, we're growing it, can we offer it to you? And we're also just about to launch our first pilot program where we received a small grant where we can basically work with a small group of asylum seekers in that area who would normally, you know, struggle with employment, but to be able to come down to the farm, work with us, and then go into the kitchen and provide cooked meals, and then those meals can then be provided to their community. So I guess they're involved in not only the process of growing their own produce, but then cooking it as well. So it's kind of had to adapt a little bit, like a lot of businesses in this crisis.
You're always, like, you're such a doer and a planner, and you're always coming up with the next great thing. I mean, I think that's just, it's like, what's Nathan going to do next? Like, that's always a really exciting question. But it must be so confronting for you to be at a time in our history where it is so incredibly hard to plan.
Yeah, I think that's probably the hardest thing, is that, you know, when you're running a business anyway and you've got a restaurant, you've already got a lot of financial pressures on you in terms of, you know, you're constantly looking at your reservations, making sure, you know, your targets are being met, your costings are all done properly. But this sort of whole thing's come along where there's no way of knowing how long it's going to last for. So it's really hard to plan. Are you planning for 3 weeks? Are you planning for 3 months? Are you planning for 6 months? And what I've really struggled with personally is just 1 minute you feel like you've got a really clear plan, and the next minute it just seems like the totally worst plan. You've got to readjust what that plan is because of, you know, the situation changing. And I think I've sort of, you know, spoken to my colleagues and a lot of other industry professionals, and it seems like that's the biggest issue, is that there's no way of knowing how long to plan for and what to plan for. So it's just totally something you can't plan for.
That's such a fundamental change in how you would think about running businesses, isn't it?
Yeah, look, normally for me, I look into the future and I say, what do I want to create and how do I want it to fit into this environment? But unfortunately, right now, we don't know what the future is going to look like, do we? So you can't really plan for a future that doesn't exist.
How do you make sense of that? Like, how do you live in that reality and function and be an inspiring employer?
Yeah, well, that's the battle, and not just an inspiring employer, but also a father and a husband. Like I think you can kind of get overloaded and caught up in it. So I've kind of tried to make a decision to not spend 24 hours a day worrying about it and thinking about it and trying to control things that are out of my control. So, I'll spend a few hours a day trying to do it, but then you've got to just essentially shut off and say, I can't do this all the time. And I think that's part of the problem for me with meditation and mental health. Meditation is all about trying to be present and being in the moment, but so much of my time now is spent looking back into the past with regret or longing for how it used to be, and then also looking into the future with fear and trepidation and not knowing what's going to come. So it's just trying to be present and be in the moment, not just for my staff and my businesses, but for my kids. Like if I can't do that, I'm going to struggle. And this could be something that goes on for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. So you can't sort of live in that state forever, can you? It's kind of like being in limbo.
Yeah, it's so interesting, where meditation is a lot about being in the moment, but then when you probably need it more than ever, or it's more and more important to be in the moment, it's harder to find the time and the muster up the energy and commitment to actually sit down and meditate.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like when things are going well, and 6 months ago or 12 months ago, I had a really good routine of getting up in the morning, doing a meditation, doing some exercise. Whereas now that there's so much sort of uncertainty and turmoil, it's just so much harder to get out of bed in the morning because you've kind of got less things to kind of focus on. And I think as a professional in this industry, you're always used to being able to kind of create a setting and control an environment. And we're also used to being really busy. But now that that's kind of been taken away, it's kind of like how do you feel your day and how do you feel useful in the day?
So tell me about how you started meditating and what you think's good about it.
Well, I started doing Pilates for my back about 18 months ago because I used to get a sore back, and got some really good results from that. And my teacher just said, "Oh, you should try meditation." And I was like, "Oh, no, not for me," And she said, "Oh, there's this 30-day challenge online if you want to do it." So we did it, and after about 2 to 3 weeks of kind of regularly meditating, I actually really started to feel the positive benefits of it. And I think it's probably like, not that I know, but it's probably like going to the gym regularly, where you start to get that kind of endorphin and that rush of going to the gym. I started to get the same thing from meditation, and my staff were like, "You've meditated today, haven't you? I can tell you were in a much calmer state." I guess it's kind of like the way they kind of explain it, and the way I see it is you start to realize that not everything has to affect you, and not every situation has to kind of overcome you or overpower you. You can kind of just step back from it and let that kind of situation pass before you react. And little things like, every emotion you have, or every act that happens, there's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. And you've got to kind of remember that when situations arise. So it's just been, positive for me. And I guess it's some of those things where unless you kind of do it for a little while and try it, but it's as simple as some people might get that same result from just going for an hour walk every day without any distractions and just being present in that kind of moment.
And have you brought meditation into your restaurants in a structured way?
Yeah, so when we opened Liminal about 12 months ago, we made it part of our daily routine, where you'd come in and do a meditation for 10 minutes just through an app, and then staff could go and check in to the private dining room and do a meditation at any time. It's one of those things though, like you can't force people to do it. You've got to kind of have people do it sort of willingly. Otherwise, it's kind of they might resent it. But
go and meditate now.
Yeah, and smile while you're at it. Doesn't really sound right, does it? But my general manager and my senior staff have really embraced it. It's also been really well received down at the farm, where the senior staff have really kind of taken it upon as well. And but I think it's one of those things where you've got to kind of do it in your own routine, whether it be first thing in the morning when you wake up, or it's just nice to kind of integrate into your daily routine. It's kind of like we kind of say it's like mind floss. It's like flossing your teeth, but for your mind.
Yeah, right. And I think, probably also, like, I was really bad at flossing until my dentist said, you can do it in the shower. And I was like, oh, yeah, right. So now I'm really good at flossing because for some reason I just found it so boring to do it at any other time. But I love being in the shower. So if I feel like I've got permission to be in the shower for an extra minute, that I can make it happen.
Well, maybe you can meditate in the shower.
Yeah, maybe I can meditate in the shower. But then when would I floss?
Well, you'd have to do both.
I'd have to do both. But yeah, it's funny. It's like, I guess you just have to play around with different ways of getting these things into your life if you want to try to. But it does make me feel so, like, it does make me question, like, what is it about being human that makes it so hard for us to do the things that would make us feel better when it's most important to do them? Like, at this point where meditation would surely be incredibly valuable and helpful, why is that the time when it's hardest to actually do and to embed into your life?
I think it's probably because we're used to seeing instant results. It's probably like going on a diet. You don't see the results straight away. You don't see it until maybe 3 or 6 months. And I think meditation is the same. It takes a few weeks before you start to really feel a positive result from it. So we're probably wanting instant gratification or instant results, and that's probably half the problem.
So when you do have quite a few people in a restaurant that are meditating regularly, do you notice a difference in how things feel or how things operate?
Yeah, it's probably just a combination of the staff just being a bit more focused and a bit more settled and not getting as distracted or as maybe annoyed by things, and but it's also just creating a culture where if you can see somebody's having a tough moment, as a group, we can say, hey, you're okay, do you need to take 5 minutes? And it kind of goes back to that being a place where people feel comfortable talking about their mental health, because it's all connected. So, people being able to say, hey, I'm really struggling today, and, not having to feel like you need a doctor's certificate, but to just better say, hey, I'm struggling today, and being able to say, why don't you just go and take 5 minutes, just take a break, and being comfortable saying that.
I'm sure that means so much to people that they feel like that's an okay thing to do or a way to be in a workplace.
I think it's becoming more and more acceptable, and even I can't even believe how much just in the last 6 months with what's been happening, like on the news now, there's all of these, relief packages and funding for mental health. It's so crazy to think that it's come along so quickly in the last sort of 12 to 18 months. It really feels like there is a shift, and I think people realise more than ever that it is a massive problem and a massive area that we need to focus on.
Yeah, definitely.
And just the way big corporate companies have HR advisors and payroll. Well, I think you'll see more and more companies having wellness components to their businesses as well.
Yeah, but hopefully smaller businesses like many restaurants and cafes will also be able to find ways to slot in that awareness and making space for people to look after their mental health as well. Because I think it's if people feel like it needs to be a big corporate thing with the big budget that goes with it, then they might feel that it's not open to their business.
Oh, look, the way we did it, we offered all of our staff the app, and there's a few different apps we use, but they're all pretty good. And you can kind of set it as a challenge where it actually gives you, like, it records your level of meditation for the week, and it was kind of like a challenge to see who could do 30 days in a row. And I think once you've done 30 days, you don't need much more of an incentive than just the results of doing it. So I think it's just about getting through that first month. So, just set yourself a challenge.
So what's one app that people could look out for?
The one I like locally is called Smiling Mind. And there's another one that I really like called Headspace. And they both have a free option to it. Smiling Mind is completely free, and you can just choose, whether you want to do a 5-minute one or a 10-minute one. But seriously, like, if you can commit to doing 10 minutes a day for a month, you won't look back, and I think you'll really see the benefits of it and appreciate it, and maybe your family and loved ones around you will as well.
10 minutes doesn't sound too hard, but
it's not, is it?
I've just been trying to. One of my ISO challenge to myself was just to be able to do a plank for a minute, and I still can't do that. So we'll see how I go. Maybe that's why we needed another 6 weeks of lockdown so I could get that sorted.
Might be all that sourdough you've been baking.
No, I haven't got on the sourdough. I've just been eating everybody else's.
Yeah, I know. Like it's so crazy that during this time, so many of people's good habits have kind of disappeared, and you know, we've turned to comfort eating and you know, all these things that aren't as good for us. But yeah, it's time to take back control, I think.
So Nathan, lots of people listening to this will have kids in their life in one way or another, and you did mention, you know, that this is a challenging time to be a father. Can you talk a bit more about that and just what you find are some of the challenges with being a father through COVID, and any tips that you might have for other parents?
Look, I've got 4 little kids, 10, 8, 5 and 3. So the biggest challenge we've found with COVID is the homeschooling component. You know, like, I don't know how anyone's expected to be able to work while they're doing that as well. You know, teaching children is tough at the best of times. I guess, you know, for me, like, when you own a business, you're always working, you're always sort of switched on. You can't just, you know, leave the job at work and go home. But I've probably got to be better at that. I think, you know, like anyone who works a lot, you've got to be able to kind of say, hey, this is no longer work time. So probably just doing things, and I'm not saying I'm perfect at it by any means, Dani, but you know, trying not to have the computer open all the time when you're at home, or the phone on you at all times. I guess it's probably really tough for kids to be going through this as well, because this is something that no one's ever faced before. So it must be really stressful for kids as well. So I guess just trying to keep things as normal as possible when you can. But I don't have too many other tips. I mean, you've probably got a few as well, I guess.
Yeah, well, my kids are a bit, I think my youngest is about the age of your oldest maybe. So I've got teenagers, and yeah, I think it is really hard for them. And I think there's definitely a lot to be said for trying to keep things normal, but also accepting that they can perceive that things are definitely not normal as well. And I think it is really hard as a parent. You do want to create that certainty for your kids and that stability. And when we are all feeling like things do keep changing so much and things are so uncertain, I don't know, it's I guess with kids it's always that balance between wanting to be really honest and straight, but also to protect them. So yeah, I find it quite a difficult balance to strike. And yeah, then there's just the practical stuff of like homeschooling is quite challenging.
Yeah,
it's very challenging.
I've got a lot more respect for teachers after all this, I have to say.
I think the teachers are so amazing. Yeah. Yes, they're incredible. Yeah. So I don't know. That's why I'm pumping you for some wise advice about how do we get through this as parents.
I don't have the answers.
So you're really in the thick of the Melbourne restaurant world. Like, how do you think people are feeling about things at the moment? We're in the midst of lockdown number 2. It's hard to know if we're nearing a corner or where we are in this funny old journey. Where do you think people are? How do you think people are placed?
Look, it feels so different this time. I think the first time around, the hardest thing for us the first time around was that we didn't even know whether we were going to have JobKeeper. So we were closing these restaurants down that were uncertain of whether we could get JobKeeper, because we were less than 12 months old. And at that stage, they were saying, you know, to be eligible, you needed to show 12 months worth of trading history. So I think that was, for us, was the biggest fear. And when we closed sort of in March, I remember saying to the guys, like, we could be opening again in 6 weeks, we could be opening again in September, we just don't know. So that was really tough. And then to be reopening again so quickly was such an amazing feeling, like, you know, to see the restaurants, even though they were restricted in terms of how many numbers we could serve, we were still, you know, fully booked each night. Hazel was doing, you know, like double sittings. Dessous had only 20 people at a sitting, but it was a great feeling to be able to open again. And then to close down again it's not just financially, hard. It's also just demoralizing that you've kind of emotionally built up to reopening, and then to close down again was just like heartbreaking. And I think, we all kind of have to go into it optimistic, but also realistic, in that, this may be 6 weeks, but it may be longer. There's just so many things that are unknown. And I think a lot of restaurants are going to, struggle to keep kind of turning off and on. It's not just a matter of turning on a light switch or off a light switch. It does take a lot of effort and energy and money to close down a business and then to reopen again. So I don't know whether a lot of restaurants are going to rush to reopen again when it's just 20 people, because it isn't very financially viable to open with 20 customers. It was probably more just to be able to be open and to be active again. I think a few restaurants will probably wait until the next stage of maybe 50 people. And I think we've all kind of started to realise that there will be restrictions in place for a long time. My worry is that people are going to feel like less likely to come out the next time around, because they'll worry that they'll then cause another shutdown. And I think people have kind of maybe got a bit ahead of themselves in the last lockdown and felt like we'd gotten through it, and now maybe they realise this is going to be a longer term thing. So I think there's a bit more uncertainty around this time, and I think there's probably a bit more fear in terms of like how long it's going to last.
Yeah, I think the energy that was present during the first lockdown just isn't there this time. Like, there isn't that energy. People, I guess, hadn't learnt to stop, and hospitality people aren't used to slowing down. So it was almost like we locked down, but we sped up in hospitality. There was so much energy and reinvention, and I think that just hasn't been there this time. I guess, in some ways that's good, because people just knew how to do takeaway. They had all their systems set up. But on the other hand, it was just people were so depleted, and it was so demoralising to be, back worse than where we'd started in some ways. In other ways, there's JobKeeper and there's those various structures. But yeah, it's a bit of a slog. And yeah, I think you're right. I think that people will be much more wary as businesses and as diners as well. So yeah, who knows where we'll be at.
Yeah, I wish I could say, Dani, but I think the next week or so will probably tell a lot for the future.
Yeah. Well, I've got my little light at the end of the tunnel is sitting in Dessous. I bought a Dessous medallion. It felt like a 17-year-old clubber. And so it's a key ring, and it's got a D on it, and it's for Dessous, Nathan's downstairs bar on Flinders Lane. And I'll know that things are good when I can be sitting there drinking some grower champagne and having some great snacks and just flaunting my medallion and just feeling like Melbourne's open again and we're allowed to go out and have fun. So thank you for holding that light at the end of the tunnel out for me and my dining compadres. And yeah, thank you so much for having a chat today. Albeit initially reluctantly, but I'm so glad that you got on board. I think you've said some really useful, important and, actionable tips. That's what we love, right?
Thanks, Dani. Thanks for reaching out and pushing me to talk.
Thanks, Nathan. All the best. This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about. We spend a week thrashing around each issue, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
This is a Deep in the Weeds production.